The first alien ship did not come with fire or fear. It came with light. It slid out of the dark past the orbit of Neptune, moving slower than any human ship could move, as if it wanted to be seen from far away. Every telescope on Earth turned toward it within hours. Every government sent messages asking who it was. For 3 days, the ship did not answer. It only drifted closer, glowing a soft blue-white, shaped like a long leaf folded around itself. On the 4th day, it spoke. Not in radio noise or code, but in perfect English, then perfect Mandarin, then perfect Arabic, cycling through every major language on the planet, as if it had studied them for years. The voice was calm and warm, almost gentle, like someone speaking to a child who had just learned to walk. "People of Earth," it said, "we have watched your world for a long time. We are the HFY Concord. We have come to help you." Those words spread across the planet faster than the ship itself had moved. Help you. Not we come in peace. Not we wish to trade. Help you, as if humanity were something broken that needed fixing. In a quiet room, beneath the United Nations building in New York, a woman named Elena Cho read those words on a screen and felt her stomach tighten. She was 44 years old, sharp-eyed, with short black hair going gray at the temples. She had spent the last 6 years working for a small office that most people did not know existed. An office that dealt with what the government called unusual contact scenarios. She had trained for a moment like this one. She had not expected it to feel so strange. "They didn't ask permission to enter the system," said the man beside her, a retired admiral named Thomas Ward, who now advised the office on anything involving ships or fleets. "They didn't ask if we wanted help. They just announced it." "Maybe that's their way of being polite," Elena said. "Announcing instead of demanding." "Or maybe," Ward said, "they already decided we don't get a vote." He was not entirely wrong, though neither of them knew that yet. 3 weeks later, the HFY ship settled into a wide orbit around Earth, far enough not to alarm anyone, close enough to watch everything. A smaller craft descended, landing gently in a field outside Geneva that the Swiss government had cleared for the occasion. Cameras from every corner of the planet captured the moment the door opened and the first HFY stepped onto human soil. They looked almost like tall, slender humans, but their skin held a faint silver sheen, and their eyes were large and dark, without visible whites. They moved slowly and carefully, the way someone moves when they do not want to frighten an animal. Their leader introduced herself as Ambassador Solène Vey, speaking in a voice that seemed built entirely out of patience. "We understand. This is a great deal to accept at once," Solène said, standing before rows of world leaders and journalists. "We do not wish to disturb your lives more than we must, but we have seen many young worlds like yours. We have seen what happens to them when no one is there to protect them. We do not intend to let that happen to Earth." The room was silent for a moment. Then a reporter near the front raised her hand and asked the question everyone was thinking. "Protect us from what?" Solène's dark eyes moved slowly across the crowd, as if deciding how much truth a room full of children could handle. "From the galaxy," she said simply. "It is a dangerous place. You have no idea how dangerous." Over the following months, the HFY Concord revealed more of itself, a little at a time, the way a parent reveals the world to a small child. They explained that they were part of a much larger alliance of species, most of them older than humanity, by tens of thousands of years, bound together by a shared purpose, watching over younger civilizations and shielding them from threats those civilizations could not yet understand. They spoke of a marauding force called the Vrek Swarm, a species that consumed worlds the way locusts consumed fields, moving from system to system, stripping resources, leaving nothing behind but dust and silence. The HFY said they had fought the Vrek for centuries. They said dozens of young worlds had been saved from the swarm because the Concord arrived in time. They also admitted, quietly, that some worlds had not been saved. Humanity listened to all of this with a strange mixture of gratitude and unease. Many people were relieved. Here was proof that the universe had rules, that someone older and wiser was willing to stand between Earth and whatever terrible things existed out in the dark. Governments began working closely with the Concord's representatives. Scientists were given access to new information about the wider galaxy. Ambassador Solène became almost a celebrity, appearing on broadcasts, always calm, always kind. always careful to remind everyone how young and fragile humanity still was. But not everyone was relieved. Inside the small office beneath the UN building, Elena Cho kept a growing list of things that did not sit right with her. The Aether had arrived without asking permission. The Aether had not shared any technology that could be used as a weapon, only technology that made life easier, more comfortable, more dependent. The Aether spoke often about protection, but never once asked humanity what it wanted for itself. "They keep calling us young," Elena said one evening, sitting across from Admiral Ward in her cramped office, a cup of cold coffee between her hands. "Young like we're children, not young like we're a new neighbor they haven't gotten to know yet." "Maybe that's exactly how they see us," Ward said. "That's the problem," Elena said. "They decided what we are before they ever really looked." What neither the Aether Concord nor most of humanity knew was that Earth's governments had not been idle in the years before that first ship arrived. Long before the leaf-shaped craft appeared past Neptune, human scientists had found something strange drifting in the outer solar system, the wreckage of another ship, ancient and cold, its hull scarred by weapons far beyond anything Earth possessed. It had drifted there for who knew how many thousands of years, a grim message left behind by a war humanity had never been part of. That single discovery had changed everything. The governments of Earth, usually so divided, had come together in secret to face a simple and terrifying truth. The galaxy was not empty, and it was not safe. If a ship like that could be destroyed, then anything could happen to Earth, and no one outside the planet's own atmosphere would come to help in time. And so, quietly, without press conferences or announcements, humanity had begun to build. Deep in the asteroid belt, hidden inside hollowed-out rocks that looked like nothing more than debris, shipyards had risen over the following 15 years. Engineers and scientists from every nation, sworn to secrecy, had poured their lives into a single project. They called it, plainly and without poetry, the Sentinel Fleet. It was not built to conquer. It was not built to explore. It was built for one purpose only: to make sure that if something terrible ever came for Earth, Earth would not be defenseless. By the time the Aether Concord arrived and began speaking of protection, the Sentinel Fleet already existed, hidden among the rocks and shadows of the outer solar system, invisible to Aether sensors that scanned Earth and its inner planets, but rarely looked so far out. Only a small circle of people knew it was there. Elena Cho was one of them. Admiral Ward was another. The President of the United States, the Secretary General of the United Nations, and a handful of military leaders from a dozen countries made up the rest. "We can't tell them," the Secretary General said during one closed meeting, her voice tight with worry. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. If they think we're hiding a fleet, they'll think we don't trust them. Or worse, they'll think we're a threat." "We are hiding a fleet," Ward pointed out. "And we don't trust them. Not completely." "That doesn't mean we tell them," Elena said. "It means we watch. We learn what kind of people the Aether really are, before we show them everything we have." So humanity played along, at least in part. It accepted the Concord's help with weather monitoring and medical technology. It allowed Aether observers to study its cities. It nodded politely, while Ambassador Solène explained, again and again, how important it was for young worlds to accept guidance from those who knew better. And all the while, out past the orbit of Mars, in the cold dark between the planets, ships kept being built, kept being tested, kept waiting. 6 months after first contact, the Aether Concord made an announcement that changed the shape of everything. They proposed what they called a protective boundary, a ring of automated defense platforms placed at the edge of the solar system, designed to detect and repel any hostile force before it could reach Earth. The idea sounded generous. Many world leaders welcomed it as a gift. But there was a catch, delivered so smoothly that some people almost missed it. For the boundary to function properly, Solène explained during a private meeting with Elena, Ward, and a small group of officials, we ask that human vessels remain within a designated safe zone, close to Earth and the Moon. Venturing beyond that zone, even for exploration, would create risks we cannot control. It is only temporary, of course. Only until you are ready. Ready by whose judgment? Elena asked. Solène's expression softened into something that looked almost like sympathy. By ours, for now. We understand this may feel restrictive, but please believe us when we say it comes from care, not control. Your world has not yet earned the scars that teach a species when danger is real. We have those scars already. Let us carry that weight for you." It was, Elena thought later, one of the kindest sounding cages she had ever heard described. The proposal caused a quiet argument that lasted weeks. Some leaders wanted to accept immediately, grateful for what looked like real protection against an unknown galaxy. Others, including Elena and Ward, argued that the boundary would trap humanity inside its own solar system, dependent on ether goodwill, unable to ever grow beyond what the Concord decided was safe. In the end, politics won a partial victory. Earth's governments agreed to the boundary in public, thanking the Concord for its generosity. In private, the Sentinel fleet kept growing, hidden just past the edge of where the Aether sensors reached, a secret kept not out of malice, but out of a hard lesson humanity had already learned once. No one else was coming to save them, so they would have to be ready to save themselves. Ambassador Solène Vey did not know about the fleet. Neither did most of the Concord. They saw only what they expected to see, a young, disorganized species, still fighting among itself, still years away from real spaceflight beyond its own moon, still needing a gentle hand to guide it forward. The Aether were not cruel. They believed, honestly and completely, that they were doing something good. That belief simply blinded them to the possibility that the species they were protecting might already be far more capable than it appeared. For nearly 2 years, life on Earth settled into an uneasy rhythm. The Aether Concord became a familiar presence, their advisors working inside government buildings, their technology quietly reshaping industries, their soft-spoken reminders about safety and patience woven into daily life. Children grew up seeing Aether faces on the news, the way earlier generations had grown up watching weather reporters. A whole generation began to think of the Concord not as visitors, but as guardians, always there, always watching, always kind. But far out past Neptune, sensors built by human hands picked up something the Aether boundary had not been designed to notice. A faint, irregular signal, moving slowly toward the outer edge of the solar system, unlike anything in the Concord's own database of known ships. It did not answer any greeting. It did not slow down. It simply came closer, one quiet day at a time, patient in a way that made the analysts watching it deeply uneasy. Elena Cho was the one who first saw the full report. She read it twice, then a third time, her coffee forgotten, and going cold beside her keyboard. When she finally looked up at Admiral Ward, her voice was steady, but her hands were not. "It's not one ship," she said. "The pattern in the signal. It's dozens of smaller returns moving together. Whatever this is, it's a fleet." Ward leaned over her shoulder and studied the numbers for a long moment. Outside the office window, the lights of Geneva glittered against the night, calm and unaware. "Do the Aether know?" he asked. "Their boundary sensors haven't flagged it yet," Elena said. "It's coming in at an angle they're not watching closely. I don't think they've noticed at all." Ward straightened up slowly, his old soldier's instincts sharpening beneath the surface of his calm expression. "Then, for now," he said, "neither have we." Neither of them said the word out loud, not yet, but both of them were thinking it. Freck, the very thing the Aether Concord had promised, again and again, that they would always be ready to stop before it ever reached this far. Somewhere out past the edge of the solar system, in the deep cold silence where no human eye could see, the fleet kept coming closer, patient and quiet, exactly the way a predator moves when it believes its prey has no idea it is being hunted at all. And somewhere closer to home, hidden inside the rocks of the asteroid belt, another fleet sat waiting, engines cold but ready, crewed by men and women who had spent 15 years preparing for a day they had hoped might never come. Neither fleet knew about the other yet, but that was about to change, and when it did, the galaxy's idea of what humanity truly was would never be the same. Elena Cho did not sleep that night, and neither did Admiral Ward. They sat together in the small office beneath the UN building, watching the same string of numbers scroll across the screen, over and over, as if repetition might change what the numbers meant. By morning, the picture had grown clearer, and it was worse than either of them had hoped. The signal was not a single fleet moving in a straight line. It was spreading, breaking into smaller groups, the way a hunting pack spreads out before it closes in on something it has already decided to kill. Whatever these ships were, they were not simply passing through, they were searching. We need to tell the Concord, Elena said, rubbing her tired eyes. Whatever pride we have about keeping the fleet secret, that doesn't matter if this really is the Vrek. They've fought this enemy before. We haven't. Ward nodded slowly, though something in his face stayed tight and unconvinced. Agreed. But watch how they react. Watch closely. They brought the data to Ambassador Solène Vey that same afternoon, in a private meeting far from the cameras and the public eye. Solène studied the readings for a long time, her large dark eyes narrowing slightly, the first real sign of worry Elena had ever seen on her face. This does match Vrek movement patterns, Solène admitted quietly. A scouting formation, most likely, sent ahead of a larger force. If they have found your system, it is not by accident. They do not waste ships on empty space. How long do we have? Ward asked. Difficult to say, Solène replied. Weeks, perhaps. Not more than a few months. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had returned to its familiar, careful calm, the tone of someone soothing a frightened child. But do not be afraid. This is exactly why the Concord came to your system. This is exactly what the protective boundary was built for. Our forces will handle this. You need only stay close to Earth and let us do what we have done many times before. Elena felt something cold settle in her chest at those words. Not fear of the Vrek, not yet, but something closer to frustration. We could help, she said. We have resources. We have people willing to fight for our own world. Solène's expression softened into something almost pitying. Elena, I understand the impulse. Truly I do. But your ships, forgive me, are not built for this kind of war. Sending human vessels out to face the Vrek would only give the enemy more targets, more lives to take. Let us protect you. That is our purpose. That is why we are here. It was said gently, but it landed like a closed door. Elena did not argue further in that room. There was no point. She only nodded, thanked the ambassador for her honesty, and left with Ward in silence, the two of them walking down a long hallway lit by soft ether lighting panels that never flickered and never dimmed. They're not going to let us fight, Elena said once they were alone in the elevator. They're not going to let us try, Ward corrected her. There's a difference, and I don't think it's malice. I think Solène genuinely believes what she's saying. That doesn't make it right. No, Ward agreed. It doesn't. Over the following weeks, the Ether Concord moved quickly to prepare. More ships arrived from beyond the solar system, sleek defensive cruisers, taking up positions along the edge of the protective boundary, their hulls glowing the same calm blue-white as the very first ship humanity had ever seen. Ambassador Solène appeared often on broadcasts, her voice steady and reassuring, telling the people of Earth that the Concord's forces were strong, experienced, and more than capable of handling any threat that came near. Most people believed her completely. Why wouldn't they? She had never given them a reason not to trust her. But inside the small circle of people who knew about the Sentinel fleet, the mood was very different. In a secure command room built deep beneath a mountain in Colorado, military leaders from a dozen nations gathered around a table, staring at the same worrying data Elena and Ward had first uncovered. They won't let our ships pass the boundary, said General Marcus Reyes, the man chosen years ago to command the Sentinel fleet, a broad-shouldered officer with a quiet, steady voice and eyes that missed nothing. That's clear enough. Question is, what do we do about it? We wait, said one of the political advisors seated near the head of the table. The Concord has fought this enemy for centuries. We haven't fought it at all. Maybe it's smarter to let them handle this one. And if they can't? Reyes asked. If this Vrek scouting force is bigger than they expect, or smarter, and their boundary breaks, what happens to Earth while we're sitting quiet in the asteroid belt, hoping someone else saves us? No one had a good answer to that question. It hung over the room like smoke. Elena, who had been given a seat at that table for the first time only weeks earlier, finally spoke. I don't think the Concord is lying to us, she said. I think they genuinely believe they can handle this. But I also think they've never once considered that we might be able to help. To them, we're still children, and you don't ask a child to help fight a war. So what do? Reyes asked her directly. We stay ready, Elena said. We don't reveal the fleet unless we absolutely have to, but if the Concord's defenses start to fail, we don't sit back and watch our own planet burn because we were too polite to speak up. We move. whether they approve or not. Rhea studied her for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. Agreed. Far out past the edge of the solar system, the Vrek scouting force continued its patient advance, splitting further into smaller groups, testing the edges of the newly built protective boundary, the way a wolf tests the edges of a fence, before deciding where it is weakest. Ether cruisers moved to intercept, and for the first time since their arrival, the people of Earth saw real combat unfold on their screens. Streaks of light in the dark, flashes of energy weapons, the slow, terrible dance of ships maneuvering for advantage millions of kilometers from home. The first battle went well for the Concorde. 3 Vrek scout ships were destroyed outright, their wreckage tumbling silently through the void, and the rest retreated back into the darkness beyond the boundary. Ambassador Solène appeared before the cameras that evening, her voice full of quiet pride. "You see," she said, "this is exactly what we promised. The boundary holds. Your world is safe. We ask only that you continue to trust us, and continue to remain patient, and this threat will pass, as so many others have before it." For a few weeks, it seemed as though she was right. The Vrek did not return. Life on Earth slowly relaxed back into its familiar rhythm, but Elena Cho found she could not relax at all. Something about the pattern of the attack bothered her, something she could not quite put into words, until she brought her concerns to a Ythir intelligence officer named Threll Kovan, one of the few Concorde representatives who had shown any real willingness to speak honestly with humans, instead of simply reassuring them. "They didn't fight like a force that expected to lose," Elena said, pointing at the recorded battle footage, spread across the table between them. "Look here, and here. They pulled back before they had to, almost like they were testing your response, not trying to break through." Threll studied the footage with narrowed eyes, his silver-toned skin catching the dim light of the room. "You may be right," he admitted slowly. "The Vrek are not known for retreating this early, not without significant losses first. This could mean they were gathering information, learning our formations, our weapon strength, our reaction times. Which means the real attack hasn't happened yet," Elena said quietly. "Which means," Threll agreed, "that whatever comes next may be far larger, and far better prepared for what we can do." When Elena brought this concern to Ambassador Solène, the response was polite, careful, and ultimately dismissive. "We appreciate your caution," Solène said, "but you must understand, our people have studied the Vrek far longer than yours has even known they exist. We will adjust our defenses as needed. There is no cause yet for greater alarm." There is no cause yet for greater alarm. Elena repeated those words to herself on the long walk back to her office, turning them over like a stone in her pocket, feeling the sharp edges of them more with every step. It was not that she believed Solène was lying, it was that she had come to understand something important about the way the Concorde thought. They had decided, long ago, exactly how capable humanity was, and no amount of new evidence seemed able to change that decision. Humans were young. Humans needed protection. Humans could not possibly understand a threat like the Vrek better than the ancient, experienced Concorde did. That belief sat underneath everything the Ythir said and did, quiet and unmovable, like bedrock. 2 months after the first battle, the second attack came, and this time, there was no mistaking its scale. Sensors across the solar system lit up with warnings, as an enormous Vrek fleet emerged from the outer dark, far larger than the scouting force before it. Hundreds of ships moving in tight, coordinated formation, driving straight toward the heart of the protective boundary. In the command room beneath the Colorado Mountain, General Reyes watched the numbers climb on the display in front of him, his jaw tightening with every update. Elena stood beside him, her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the same terrible picture. "That's not a scouting force," Reyes said quietly. "That's an invasion." On the screen beside the tactical display, a live broadcast showed Ambassador Solène addressing the people of Earth, her voice, for the first time since her arrival, carrying a thin edge of real tension beneath its practiced calm. "People of Earth," she said, "please remain calm. Our fleet is moving to intercept. The protective boundary will hold. We ask that you trust us, as you have trusted us from the beginning. We will not let harm come to your world." Reyes turned to Elena, his expression grim. "Do you believe her?" Elena watched the tactical numbers scroll past, watched the sheer size of the incoming Vrek force, compared to the Ithir defense fleet arrayed to meet it, and felt the cold certainty settle deep in her chest. "I believe she means it," Elena said slowly. "I don't believe it's true." Reyes was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the display, on the thin blue-white line of Uther ships standing between Earth and the dark red wave of the approaching Vrek fleet. Then he reached forward and pressed the comm switch on the table in front of him, his voice steady and clear as it carried down through every level of the mountain base to the crews waiting in the cold silence of the asteroid belt, standing beside ships that had never once been meant for show. "This is General Reyes," he said. "All Sentinel Fleet personnel, report to launch stations. Power up the drives. We are not waiting for permission this time." Far out in the dark, past the reach of Ithir sensors, engines, that had been silent for 15 years, began, one by one, to wake. The Vrek fleet struck the protective boundary like a hammer striking glass. Ithir cruisers, arranged in careful defensive lines, opened fire the moment the enemy came within range, streaks of blue-white energy crossing the black distance to meet the dark red hulls of the Vrek warships. For a few minutes, it looked almost even. Explosions bloomed silently against the void, ships spinning away, trailing fire and debris, the ancient art of space warfare playing out exactly the way the Concorde had trained for over centuries of conflict with this same enemy. But it did not stay even for long. The Vrek did not fight the way the Ithir expected. Their scouting force 2 months earlier had learned enough to change their tactics completely. Instead of meeting the Ithir line head-on, the main Vrek fleet split apart, dozens of smaller groups peeling away from the main formation, slipping past gaps in the Ithir defense that had never been tested before. Ithir cruisers, built for long, disciplined battles against a predictable enemy, struggled to adjust fast enough. Communication between ships grew tangled and slow. Formations that had held for 100 years began, for the first time, to break apart. In the command room beneath the Colorado Mountain, Elena Cho watched the battle unfold across a wall of screens, her hands clenched tight at her sides. Beside her, General Reyes spoke in short, clipped sentences into his headset, coordinating with the crews of the Sentinel fleet as they raced inward from the asteroid belt. "They're being flanked," Reyes said grimly, watching a cluster of Uther ships suddenly find themselves surrounded on 3 sides. "The Vrek learned their patterns. They're exploiting it." "How long until our fleet reaches the fighting?" Elena asked. 20 minutes, Reyes said. "Maybe less, if the pilots push the drives harder than they're rated for." "Push them," Elena said. 20 minutes might be too long already." On the far side of the solar system, Ambassador Solène Vey stood aboard the Ithir flagship, watching her own fleet crumble in ways she had never imagined possible. She had fought the Vrek before, on other worlds, in other systems, and she had always understood the shape of that fight. This was different. This enemy had studied them. This enemy had learned. "Pull the outer ships back," she ordered, her voice tighter now, the calm reassurance she showed to humans, nowhere present in the room. "Form a tighter defensive ring around the inner boundary. We cannot let them reach the planet." But the order came too late for some. A group of 6 Ithir cruisers, cut off from the rest of the fleet, found themselves surrounded by Vrek warships closing in from every direction. Their weapons fired desperately, taking down one enemy ship, then another, but there were simply too many. One by one, the Ithir cruisers went dark, their lights winking out against the black, like candles pinched between careful fingers. Back on Earth, people watched the battle unfold on their screens, with growing horror. For the first time since the Concorde's arrival, the calm and confident voice that had guided them through every fear now sounded strained, uncertain, afraid. Ambassador Solène appeared briefly on a public broadcast, her composure cracking at the edges. "The situation is difficult," she admitted, "but our fleet continues to fight. Please remain calm. We are doing everything we can." It was the first time she had ever admitted, out loud, that everything might not be enough. Far out past the orbit of Mars, the Sentinel fleet raced inward through the dark, engines burning hotter than they had ever been tested, formations tightening as they approached the edge of the battle. Aboard the lead ship, a heavy cruiser named the Resolve, General Reyes stood on the bridge, watching the chaos unfold on his own tactical display, close enough now to see it directly, rather than through the delayed feed from Earth. "Sir," said the young tactical officer beside him, her voice tight with tension. "The Uther fleet is fracturing. If we don't reach them in the next few minutes, their whole formation could collapse." "Then we don't wait for the next few minutes," Reyes said. He turned to the comm officer. "Open a channel. All ships. We engage the moment we're in range. Full formation. Standard defense pattern Bravo. Protect the Yathir survivors first. Then push the Vrek back from the inner boundary." "Copy that, General," the comm officer said, relaying the order across the fleet. As the Sentinel fleet closed the final distance, something remarkable happened. Something that no one aboard any Aether ship expected, and no Vrek commander had accounted for in their careful, patient plans. New signals bloomed across every sensor screen in the battle, dozens of them, then hundreds, moving with a speed and precision that made even seasoned Aether officers pause in confusion. Aboard the Aether flagship, a tactical officer turned to Ambassador Solen with wide, startled eyes. "Ambassador, we are reading a new fleet entering the engagement. Origin point. It's coming from inside the system, from the asteroid belt." Solen stared at the display, her mind struggling for a moment to make sense of what she was seeing. "That is not possible," she said slowly. "There is no human fleet. There has never been a human fleet." But the numbers did not lie, and neither did what happened next. The newly arrived ships did not hesitate, did not circle cautiously the way a young, untested force might. They moved with the confidence of a fleet that had trained for exactly this moment for 15 long years, weapons hot, formations tight, striking at the Vrek ships that had encircled the stranded Aether cruisers with a speed and coordination that startled even the enemy. The Resolve led the charge directly into the heart of the fighting, its weapons tearing into the flank of a Vrek formation that had been seconds away from finishing off the last of the trapped Aether ships. Around it, dozens of smaller Sentinel vessels spread out in practice patterns, cutting off Vrek retreat routes, breaking apart the enemy's carefully built advantage piece by piece. "General," the tactical officer said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and excitement, "the Vrek formation is breaking. They didn't expect this. They're pulling back." Reyes allowed himself the smallest, grimmest smile. "Good. Keep the pressure on. Don't let them regroup." Aboard the Aether flagship, Ambassador Solen watched the battle turn, watched a species she had believed incapable of true spaceflight, fight with a skill and discipline that matched, and in some places surpassed, her own people's centuries of experience. She felt something she had not felt in a very long time, the ground shifting beneath a belief she had never once thought to question. "How?" she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else in the room. "How did we not see this?" The question would haunt her for a long time after. The truth was simple, though it would take her weeks to fully accept it. The Concorde had never truly looked. They had decided, the moment they first observed Earth's slow-moving satellites and primitive rockets, exactly what humanity was capable of, and they had never once revised that judgment, not even as evidence quietly piled up around them. They had seen only what they expected to see. Humanity, meanwhile, had learned long ago never to reveal its full strength until the moment truly demanded it, and this moment, watching its own world threatened by an enemy from the depths of space, demanded everything. The battle raged for nearly 6 more hours. The combined force of Aether and Sentinel ships, fighting together now in a rough, improvised coordination that grew steadier with every passing minute, slowly pushed the Vrek fleet back from the inner boundary. It was not an easy victory. Ships were lost on both sides, human and Aether alike, and for a long while the outcome remained uncertain. But as the hours wore on, the Vrek formations grew ragged, their advantage of surprise long spent, and eventually, as the sun rose over the eastern coast of North America, the last of the Vrek warships turned and fled back into the outer dark, leaving behind a battlefield littered with wreckage, and the quiet, stunned silence of 2 very different fleets that had just fought side by side for the very first time. Aboard the Resolve, General Reyes finally allowed himself to sit down, exhaustion pressing heavy against his shoulders. Around him, the crew moved through the quiet, careful work of counting losses and confirming the enemy's retreat. In the command room beneath the Colorado Mountain, Elena Cho watched the final reports scroll across her screen, relief and something else, something heavier and more complicated, settling into her chest. Earth was safe, for now. But nothing about the world she had known before this day would ever be quite the same again. The secret was out. The Concord now knew, in the clearest way possible, exactly what humanity had been hiding beneath its polite, patient silence. Her comm screen chimed softly. A priority message, marked urgent. Sender listed simply as Ambassador Solène Vey. Elena took a slow breath and opened it. The message was short, only a single line, but it carried more weight than any speech Solène had given since the day her ship first appeared past the orbit of Neptune. We need to talk, immediately, alone, if possible. Elena stared at the words for a long moment, then reached for her coat. The meeting took place in a small room aboard the Ythir flagship, far from cameras, far from crowds, far from the careful public image both sides had worked so hard to maintain. Elena Cho arrived, with only Admiral Ward at her side. Ambassador Solène Vey waited for them alone, standing near a wide window that looked out over the drifting wreckage still scattered across the edge of the solar system. Silent reminders of everything that had just happened. "Thank you for coming," Solène said quietly, without turning around at first. When she finally faced them, her expression carried none of its usual practiced calm. She looked, for the first time since Elena had met her, tired and uncertain, like someone standing at the edge of a belief she had held her entire life, watching it crack apart beneath her feet. "You wanted to talk," Elena said carefully. "So talk." Solène studied her for a long moment before speaking. "How long?" she asked. "Has that fleet existed?" 15 years, Elena said. There was no point lying now. The truth had already spoken for itself, out there among the stars, in the shape of ships that should not have existed. 15 years, Solène repeated softly. "We arrived nearly 2 years ago. You already had it built by then." "We built it before you ever came," Elena said. "Before we knew you existed, we found the wreckage of another ship, out past Neptune, long before your leaf-shaped craft ever appeared. A ship destroyed by weapons far beyond anything we had. It taught us something important, Ambassador. It taught us that the galaxy does not care whether we are ready for it or not." Solène was quiet for a long time, her dark eyes drifting back toward the window, toward the slow, silent drift of wreckage outside. "We believed we understood your species," she said at last. "We studied your history, your wars, your slow steps into space. We saw a young world, still learning to walk. We never imagined you might already be running, quietly, in the dark, where we could not see." "You never asked," Admiral Ward said, speaking for the first time since entering the room. His voice was steady, without anger, simply stating a fact that had been true from the very beginning. "You told us what we were. You never once asked us to tell you ourselves." Solène flinched slightly at that, though she did not argue. "You are right," she admitted. "That is our failing, not yours. We came to protect worlds we believed could not protect themselves. It is difficult perhaps to imagine we might have been wrong about that, even once." "You weren't entirely wrong," Elena said, more gently now. "We couldn't have fought that fleet alone. Not with only what we had. Your ships bought us time. Your defense held long enough for ours to arrive. If your fleet hadn't been there first, taking the worst of that attack, we might have lost far more than we did." Solène looked at her, surprised by the honesty of it. "You give us credit, even now?" "Because it's true," Elena said simply. "We're not trying to prove we don't need you, Ambassador. We're trying to prove we're not children, who need to be hidden away every time danger comes near. There's a difference between needing help and needing to be protected from the truth of your own strength." For a long moment, no one spoke. Outside the window, a work crew of small Ythir vessels moved slowly among the wreckage, beginning the long, careful task of recovering what could be recovered, honoring what could not. "The wreck will return," Solène said finally, her voice quieter now, stripped of its old confidence. "That scouting force, that invasion, it was not their full strength. Not even close. They test worlds before committing everything. We have seen this pattern before, on other planets, in other systems. They will come back, and next time, they will not underestimate either of our fleets again." "Then we should stop underestimating each other too," Elena said. Solène turned to face her fully, something shifting behind her dark, careful eyes. "What are you proposing?" "An alliance," Elena said. "A real one. Not protector and protected. Equals, working together, sharing what we each know." Your centuries of experience against the Vrek. Our fleet. Our tactics. Whatever we've learned from having to survive without anyone watching over us. Together, we hold a much better chance than either of us alone. It took 3 days of quiet, difficult negotiation before the terms were fully agreed upon. Word of the Sentinel fleet had already spread across Earth by then. Impossible to hide once footage of the battle reached every screen on the planet. The reaction was a strange mixture of shock, pride, and for some, a quiet anger at the governments that had kept such a secret for so long. Elena found herself giving more explanations in those 3 days than she had given in the previous 15 years combined, standing before cameras, before parliaments, before ordinary people demanding to know why their leaders had never told them what was hiding in the dark beyond Mars. "We didn't build that fleet to hide from you," she said, during one particularly tense broadcast interview. "We built it because we learned, the hard way, that no one else was guaranteed to come save us. We hoped we'd never need it. We're grateful, more than I can say, that when we did need it, it was ready." Not everyone was satisfied with that answer. Trust, once bent, does not snap back into its old shape easily, whether between nations or between species. But slowly, carefully, the shock began to settle into something steadier. A strange new pride. The quiet recognition that humanity had never truly been as helpless as the Concorde, or even many humans themselves, had believed. Aboard the Ether flagship, Ambassador Solène faced a different kind of reckoning. Word of what had happened at Earth traveled quickly through the wider Concorde, and not everyone welcomed the news the way Solène herself eventually came to. Some among the Concorde's leadership saw the revelation of the Sentinel fleet as a betrayal, proof that humanity could not be trusted, a species that had smiled and nodded while hiding weapons of war in its own back garden. Solène found herself defending a species she had, until recently, seen only as a ward in need of guidance. "They did not hide a weapon aimed at us," she argued, during a tense communication with senior Concorde leadership far across the stars. "They hid a shield built to protect what was theirs, because history taught them no one else could be relied upon to do it for them. We arrived offering protection, and never once thought to ask if they already understood the cost of surviving without it. That is our failure to see clearly, not their failure to trust us." It was not an easy argument to win, and it would take much longer than 3 days to fully settle. But slowly, carefully, word spread through the wider Concorde of what had truly happened at Earth. A young species, dismissed as fragile, had built in secret what it needed to survive, and when the moment came, had arrived not to prove a point, but to save lives, Ether lives included, standing shoulder to shoulder in a battle neither side could have won alone. General Reyes, still recovering from the long hours of battle, found himself invited to a very different kind of meeting, only a week later. A joint council, seated at a long table, alongside Ambassador Solène, Elena Cho, Admiral Ward, and senior officers from both fleets. The first true attempt to plan, not for the next attack alone, but for a future built on something closer to equal footing. "The Vrek will come again," Solène said, opening the meeting with the same words she had spoken privately to Elena days before. "Perhaps not soon, perhaps not for a year, perhaps longer, but they will come, and next time, they will bring everything they have." "Then we prepare for everything they have," Reyes said, "together. Real cooperation this time, shared intelligence, shared tactics, combined training exercises between our fleets. No more boundaries keeping our ships penned in close to Earth, like we're something fragile that needs to be locked safely away." Solène inclined her head slightly, something that, for a Ether, passed as a gesture of genuine respect. "Agreed, General. Though I will admit, watching your fleet fight as it did, I find myself wondering less about protecting Earth, and more about what Earth might one day help protect." It was, Elena thought, watching the exchange from across the table, the first time she had ever heard a member of the Concorde speak of humanity as something other than a task to be managed. It felt like a small thing, a single sentence in a long negotiation, but it carried the weight of everything that had changed in the space of a single, terrible, remarkable week. That evening, Elena stood on the rooftop of the UN building in New York, looking up at a sky she had once thought held only stars and silence, now carrying somewhere within it 2 fleets, human and Ether, working through the slow, careful process of learning to trust one another as equals, rather than guardian and ward. Admiral Ward joined her quietly, 2 cups of coffee in his hands, offering her one without a word. "You did good work these past few days," he said. "We all did," Elena replied, "though I don't think this is over. Not the Alliance, not the Vrek, none of it." "No," Ward agreed. "It's just beginning." Far above them, past the reach of any telescope, the wreckage of the battle still drifted slowly through the dark, a quiet reminder of the cost already paid, and a warning of the cost that might still come. But alongside that wreckage, for the first time, Yether and human ships moved together in careful, coordinated patrol, no longer separated by a boundary built on the belief that one side needed to be kept safely apart from the responsibilities of the other. Somewhere out past the edge of known space, the Vrek retreated to lick their wounds and plan their return, having learned a hard lesson of their own. The small, quiet, seemingly fragile world they had come to claim was guarded by more than they had ever accounted for, and next time, it would not be caught by surprise. A year passed, and the solar system did not look the same as it once had. The protective boundary still existed, but it had changed shape entirely. No longer a fence built to keep humanity penned close to Earth, but a joint defense line, patrolled equally by Yether cruisers and Sentinel fleet vessels, working together in patterns both sides had spent months refining. Human shipyards, once hidden inside hollowed-out asteroids and kept secret from the world, now operated openly, expanding under a new agreement that allowed Yether engineers and human engineers to trade knowledge freely for the first time. Earth ships grew faster, stronger, better armed, built with insight from centuries of Yether experience fighting the Vrek. Yether ships, in turn, grew more flexible, adopting tactics born from humanity's long, hard history of fighting wars against its own kind. Tactics the Concord had never needed before, because they had never before faced an enemy who adapted as quickly as the Vrek had learned to. Ambassador Solène Vey remained on Earth, though her role had changed as much as everything else around her. She no longer stood before cameras promising protection to a fragile, grateful world. Instead, she served as the Concord's senior liaison to what the wider alliance now called, with a mixture of respect and lingering unease, the human question. The growing understanding that this small, young-looking species was not young at all in the ways that mattered most, and that the old assumptions the Concord had carried into every first contact for centuries might not hold true here, or perhaps anywhere else they had not yet truly looked. "You've changed," Elena Cho told her one evening, the two of them sharing a quiet dinner in a small restaurant overlooking the Geneva Lake, a habit they had fallen into over the past year, an unlikely friendship built slowly out of shared crisis and hard, honest conversation. "So have you," Solène replied, a faint smile touching the corners of her mouth, an expression Elena had learned to recognize as genuine warmth rather than practiced diplomacy. "A year ago, you watched me with suspicion in every conversation. A year ago, you spoke to me like I was a child who needed careful handling," Elena said, though there was no real bite in the words anymore, only the comfortable honesty of two people who had earned the right to speak plainly with one another. "Things change." "They do," Solène agreed. "Though I confess, even now, my own people back home find this difficult to accept fully. Centuries of pattern are not undone in a single year, however remarkable that year has been." It was true. Word of what had happened at Earth had spread throughout the wider Concord, but old habits of thought did not vanish simply because new evidence appeared. Some among the Concord's leadership still spoke of humanity with the same careful, condescending tone Solène herself had once used, insisting that one impressive battle proved little, that true partnership between species required generations of trust, not a single dramatic rescue. Others had grown genuinely curious, even eager, sending scholars and engineers to study human history, human innovation, the strange, restless creativity that had allowed a species without any outside help at all to build fleets and cities and civilizations across an entire planet in a fraction of the time it had taken older species to accomplish the same. General Reyes, for his part, spent much of that year overseeing the expansion of the Sentinel fleet, now renamed, at humanity's own insistence, simply the Earth Defense Fleet, no longer a secret, no longer something whispered about only in hidden command rooms beneath distant mountains. He worked closely with Yether military commanders, building joint training exercises that pushed both fleets harder than either had ever been pushed before, preparing not just for the next Vrek attack, but for whatever else the wider galaxy might one day bring to Earth's door. "You know," he said to Elena one afternoon, watching a joint fleet exercise unfold on the tactical display in the newly built, no longer secret command center. "A year ago, I thought the hardest part of my job would be keeping this fleet hidden. Turns out the hardest part was convincing an entire species of aliens that we weren't the threat they should be worried about." "Are they convinced now?" Elena asked. Reyes considered the question carefully before answering. "Some of them, the ones who were actually there, who fought beside us, they get it. The ones back on Yether worlds who only hear the story secondhand, that's harder. Old beliefs don't die easy, even for people who've lived 1,000 years and should know better by now." Elena thought of her own early days in that small office beneath the UN building, reading the Concorde's first message, "Help you," and feeling that same sharp discomfort she had never quite been able to name until much later. She understood now what it had been, the quiet insult of being decided about, rather than being asked, the assumption that kindness and control could wear the exact same gentle face. "Give it time," she said. "A year ago, none of us believed any of this was possible either." The true test came 8 months later, when Vrek scouts appeared once more at the edge of the solar system, this time in far greater numbers than before, testing the new defense line with the same patient, probing tactics they had used the first time, but the response they met was nothing like what they had encountered a year earlier. Ether and human ships moved together in tight, practiced coordination, anticipating the Vrek's flanking maneuvers before they could even fully develop, cutting off retreat routes, closing gaps that had once shattered the old, isolated Ether formations. The battle that followed was shorter, sharper, and far more decisive than the first. Within hours, the Vrek scouting force had been driven back with heavy losses, forced to retreat far beyond the edge of the system, their careful testing yielding nothing but proof that Earth's defenses had grown into something far stronger than they had accounted for. Aboard the Resolve, watching the enemy retreat on his tactical display, General Reyes allowed himself a rare moment of quiet satisfaction. Beside him, a young Yether officer named Kale Thren, assigned to the Joint Command Staff as part of the new partnership, turned to him, with something like genuine admiration in his large, dark eyes. "A year ago," Kale said, "I would not have believed this outcome possible. Not this quickly, not with forces so newly combined." "A year ago," Reyes replied, "I wouldn't have believed it either." Word of the victory spread quickly, not just across Earth, but throughout the wider Concorde, carried by Ether ships returning home, with reports that could no longer be dismissed or explained away. The human question, as the Concorde had once called it, began to shift in the minds of many across the Alliance, from a puzzle about a fragile young world needing protection, into something closer to genuine respect for a species that had proven, again and again, that it understood survival in ways few others had ever been forced to learn. 6 months after that battle, Ambassador Solène Vey stood before the full Yether Concorde Council, gathered across a vast holographic chamber that connected worlds separated by hundreds of light-years, delivering a report that would shape how the Concorde approached first contact for generations to come. "We came to Earth believing we understood exactly what we would find," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "A young species, gifted perhaps, but fragile, in need of guidance and protection from a galaxy it could not yet comprehend. We were wrong, not because humanity lacked wisdom, but because we never once thought to ask what wisdom they might already carry, forged through struggles we never witnessed, and never bothered to learn about before making our judgments. Earth did not need saving from the galaxy. Earth needed to be seen clearly, as an equal, capable of standing beside us rather than beneath us." The chamber was silent for a long moment after she finished speaking. Then, slowly, voices rose in agreement. First a few, then many, until the old, careful assumptions the Concorde had carried for centuries began, at last, to genuinely shift. Back on Earth, Elena Cho stood once more on the rooftop of the UN building, looking up at a night sky that no longer felt distant or unknown, but instead felt like the edge of a partnership still being written, one careful step at a time. Admiral Ward, gray-haired and slower now, joined her as he often did, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Word came through this morning," he said, handing her a cup. "The full Concorde Council formally recognized Earth as an equal partner today. No more protective boundary. No more restrictions on where our ships can travel. Just partnership, plain and simple. Elena took the coffee, wrapping her hands around its warmth, and looked out over the city lights spread beneath her, bright and steady against the dark. Feels strange, she said. A little over 2 years ago, they landed in a field outside Geneva and told us they'd come to protect us, like we were something small and breakable. And now? Ward asked. Now they know better, Elena said, a small, tired, genuine smile crossing her face. It only took a war, a secret fleet, and about 1,000 uncomfortable conversations to get here. Ward chuckled softly, raising his cup toward the stars in a quiet, informal toast. Here's to 1,000 more then. Best way I know to make sure nobody makes that same mistake about us again. Far above them, past the edge of the atmosphere, past the orbit of the moon, and out toward the wide, patient dark, where 2 fleets now moved together in careful partnership, the wreckage of an old, mistaken belief drifted slowly into memory, replaced by something new, a galaxy slowly learning that the quiet, young-looking world called Earth had never truly needed saving at all. It had only ever needed to be seen clearly, and given the chance to stand. And it had.